Good evening, everyone. I am A.B. Timothy. I am your host for the Keeping the Beacon Lit podcast. This is a weekly podcast for writers, by writers, and the entire premise is that I went to a Comic Con here in Tucson, Arizona last summer, and there was a panel called Keeping the Beacon Lit. And it was all about staying creative in dark times. And that really inspired me to get back into writing. And so I've taken that and ran with it almost as my brand. And that's where the show came from. Very, very heavily inspired by that panel that I got to sit in on. If you're just tuning in for the first time, my goal is to inspire you as a creative to keep being creative, keep telling stories, keep uh, doing art, whether that be through storytelling or through a more visual medium. And today's episode is sort of specifically about writing and specifically about the ideas of romance in writing. I've only written romance subplots. I've mostly focused my writing on adventure stories or action stories with romantic subplots for here or there, and they are sometimes vital, sometimes not so vital, but they add a level of humanity and a level of stakes. It's kind of cheap stakes sometimes if you use it improperly, but we'll be talking a lot about that kind of thing in today's episode. With me, I have my guests, Jessica Barbary, who hosts the Indie Book Spotlight podcast, and also I have Secret, who is the author of Bet Donovan. I could be pronouncing that wrong. I believe that's correct. And it just recently, or at least according to her X account, I don't know if that was a pinned post. It might have been a pinned post, but I saw on her X account that her book did breach the top 10 on Amazon for, I believe it was Civil War historical fiction, which is super cool, very impressive. And I'm happy to have her on the show to talk about the romantic subplots or even the plot of that book. And it should be a lot of fun. And the title of today's episode is Cupid's Arrow, because it's all about the fictional representation of characters being shot with that old muse's deadly weapon. So, right, that's the gist of the episode. I'm going to give my guests here a chance to introduce themselves a little bit and talk about what they're writing and what inspired them. So we'll start. Jessica, I want to know, so sort of as your introduction, who are you and what do you write, and what is the main inspiration behind your book's romance, be it a subplot or a main plot?
Sure. I traditionally I would say my books are maybe a little more. They run the gamut. They're fantasy, so it's
Mm.
fantasy world, but it runs from epic fantasy to more literary fantasy. And the biggest romantic plot line that I have would be in my original series, which is a four-part series, which features a male and a female protagonist. And you know, the thing that I wanted to why I created the romance that I did within that storyline was mostly because I was dissatisfied with a lot of what I had seen become popular as far as the dynamics of relationships. And I thought I wanted to represent something that was like a healthy, positive, and lifting and continuing relationship. So my couple, they're very like you see them, fall in love, you see them get married, you see them go through things and endure. And it's more of like this presentation of what enduring love looks like when it's, after the chase, which is a lot of what I think most romance is really just the chase. But I really wanted to show like what does an enduring marriage look like? How do you make that work? So
Right, that's really cool. The my mind immediately goes to comparisons, and comparison is the theft of joy, unfortunately. But I do like comparing things for our audience if they haven't read your work. It sounds to me kind of like you are almost working in the vein of the Wheel of Time, because of course this is also the subtitle of this show is the Wheel of Time show with A.B. Timothy. And so in the Wheel of Time, there's several enduring romances. There's the classic romance with Rand and his love interests, but there's also side characters who get their own romantic plots and their romantic subplots. And it sounds like your fantasy story, at least the romantic piece of it, is similar in a way to Perrin and Fire, who are a one of the best couples in the series, who get married about halfway through the books, and then we have to see them survive through the end of days and the last battle together as a couple, and like what that means and how their relationship affects their character arcs and their journeys. But it's an enduring romance. It's a persistent love that is super absent from a lot of stories. I think that's awesome. Frankly, I don't think we get enough romantic endurance in fiction. So thank you for sharing, and that's very cool. All right, and Miss Secret, I want to know the same thing. Who are you? What have you written, and what is the main inspiration behind the romance in Bet Donovan, if there is one, like as a subplot or a main plot?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me.
Mm-hmm.
It's always really fun to be here. Always have a great time. My name is Secret Stacy, and I write novels under the pen name SR Stacy. From Central Arkansas, born and raised. I've been married to my husband for the last 20 years, and together we have raised a horde of free range children. And when I'm not chasing them around and wasting money growing vegetables that I could buy cheaper at the store, I write. And my debut novel, Bet Donovan and the Battle for Wyoming, is currently available for purchase on Amazon. It is this great, fun, gritty, modernized Western. It's a coming of age story about a young refugee woman who becomes the reluctant figurehead of a war between a small Wyoming town and a group of corrupt US Marshals. It is like Tomb Raider, if it was done by Guy Ritchie in the Wild West. It is so much fun. And so if you haven't checked that out, then I would recommend you do Bet Donovan in the Battle for Wyoming. And my second book is called Life in the Quiet, and it's romantic suspense. That is set to drop May 22nd. So those are the projects that I have going right now. As far as romance in those projects, it's real funny because that what Jessica said is I relate to that very much. I do not like a lot of the portrayal of romance in fiction, and my characters tend to fall in love quickly and they stay in love forever. And so they go through some very, trying and horrible things at times, but like she said, it's love and marriage should be enduring, and I just don't think that there's a lot of that representation in fiction. I don't think there's a lot of, so I always try, I think in my stories I try to make the relationship aspect very relatable, and so it's real world, but the kind of this the action, the subplot might get a little fantastical or gratuitous, or violent, but the relationship between the characters I try to keep very relatable, and I think that enduring love is relatable, and it should be more relatable, and it should be showcased more in fiction and in movies and stories. And so I totally agree with that, and that's funny because I have the same perspective, and my characters are kind of the same way. They fall in love in the midst of chaos, and then they kind of have this epic lifelong story.
100%. I also couldn't agree more with Jessica. The um so as you should know if you're watching this show, I am AV Timothy. That is my authorial nom de plume, and I write. Currently, I'm working on finishing a sword and sorcery fantasy called The Shards of Arthur's Shield, in which there is a romantic subplot. It's not the heart of the story, and we'll get to a question kind of later on that talks about should romance be the heart of a story, even if it's only a subplot or not, and how it affects your wider story. But we'll talk about that later. My characters are similar. I sort of write in the closing lines of the book because it's written from the perspective of a sort of monastic individual who's writing the king's ledger, and he's writing the tale of the king and how the king came to power. And at the end of it, he kind of talks about the king's reign and how he and his wife had a fruitful reign and so on and so on. And so it's implied that there is an enduring romance, even though the story in the story itself, it's very much a, yeah, they fell in love during the story and they got married as sort of the ending of the story. And so it's the hope of the reader, hopefully, is that they'll imagine a story continuing on where these two characters do live a happy life together and are an enduring romantic pairing. And that might be explored later on in some novellas that I plan on writing. But for right now, the romance is kind of the one of the driving forces in the background, and I think it's, well, of course, I think it's well done because it's my book. So I'm, but cool. So with that, I wanted to then ask. We'll start with Secret this time. Uh, the characters in your book who get romantically intertwined, how do they come to find themselves in that predicament? Like, is there another way of kind of thinking about this idea? Is the almost the Tumblr-esque idea of like friends to lovers, enemies to lovers, strangers to friends to lovers, like that
Right.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
What's their situation?
So totally different, for each project. But in
Mm-hmm.
in Bet Donovan, they are a bit enemies to lovers. It has very, very light on the romance. It's a subplot, and it's not, really central to the story. But she does fall in love with one of the U.S. Marshals in the story, and at the onset, they are sort of the bad guys, and so they're very much enemies to lovers. In Life in the Quiet, they fall in love at first sight, which I think is really fun. I fell in love with my husband at first sight, and so I just think it's fantastic. And so the totally different sort of tropes there, but very fun.
Cool. And then Jessica, same kind of question to you. Like you can pick any of your projects, or you can talk about sort of all of them, like Secret did. Like, what, where do you see yourself usually writing from? Is it usually one of these in particular, or is it different for every project?
Yeah, so the two main stories that I'm chasing, they're very the love story, if you will, for the two protagonists is very different. In my first book, it's very much, I would say, if you're gonna trope it, friends to lovers type of situation, um, because they meet first, they get to know each other, and they were never like they're on the same team always. So
Mm-hmm.
that would be probably more of that situation. The next thing that I am exploring, however, is a little bit more of a broken situation, which I don't know, like that one I'm interested to explore it because it's more of like that lust to commitment type of situation
Hmm.
where it's like they they entangle with each other in something that is not healthy or good, and then they have to end up together, but it's like it's it's how do you forgive each other and actually build something real after you've built it on something not good. So they're very different stories, and it's interesting to try and think of like how to present them both in a compelling way where you don't hate the characters.
Right. And I don't think, like, you used the term that I was looking for earlier, and I when I said Tumblr, I did mean trope, which, Tumblr talks a lot about tropes, but
Yeah.
the it's not really respectful of the story as a whole to trope it down to a particular, like, 3-word phrase. But sometimes that's just an easy way to market it, so every story, it should be more than just friends to lovers, I think, if you're gonna have a sort of a wholesome romance situation, because I mean it's true to life, right?
Yep.
You'll never, well, I shouldn't say never, but more often than not, if you talk to a couple, like if you have like an old couple at church, for example, if you talk to them, they've lived 40 years together, and it all been, sunshine, rainbows, and roses? Probably not, but they've stuck it out. They've endured, as you were talking about earlier. Sometimes there's fights or hardships that they have to get through together. And I do love the idea of love, so like sort of amore über alles, sort of love overall. And sometimes you can write a compelling situation there, but you have to be really careful not to make your characters come across as idiots either, because one thing that I kind of have in my sci-fi setting, which is those books are still a few years out, but one of the things I have there is one of the characters is deeply in love with the Empress of the Galactic Imperium, and that love drives him to stupidity, because especially as a guy, I know this because I know what love does to us men. Especially, we are complete idiots when we fall for a girl. The term of falling head over heels is, like, I think it's too light a description sometimes. It can cause us to crash and burn if we're not careful. And but sometimes also, like yes, that might make your character seem stupid, but it might also make him seem real and might help him relate to your audience. Because if you're writing for an audience of, people who have experienced hardship in romance, then it's easier to relate to them sometimes if you yourself as the author have experienced that, and you can write better characters for having experienced it. For my book, when the characters are introduced to each other, they're complete strangers, and it's revealed throughout the series that it pretty much is a friends to lovers situation, because they're never really estranged to each other. They're just sort of like, I don't know you, you don't know me, let's hang out and make friends or whatever. And it's very, I hate to say it, but it is very standard issue fantasy romance. That I For a while during the outlining stage, I was this close to putting her in the tower guarded by the dragon. Like, it's that fantastical of a romance, but I didn't. She is safe in Camelot for the whole story. She's never really under threat, but she sees the main character develop into this hero, into this grand king who he's supposed to be, and that's who she falls in love with, is someone who is a down to earth, farm boy, who then is thrust into the annals of responsibility and power and doesn't necessarily want it. And so he doesn't let it corrupt him, because that's what she's worried about, is when he gets a noble title, a noble horse and armor and all these fancy bits and bobs. She's worried that he's just going to turn into one of them, and he doesn't, thankfully. And so that's how they're able to exist as a couple, because she hates nobility, as I think every well-written noble person should. Nobles for the most part suck, but they shouldn't, because they're supposed to be noble. Then that is another podcast idea to talk about for fantasy romance, or for not romance, but just fantasy in general, especially medieval fantasy. I digress. So yeah, that's the situation in the Shards of Arthur's Shield, is sort of friends to lovers. So on that respect, however, I want to know, Jessica, because we're kind of just ping-ponging here. Jessica, I want to know, how important is the romance to your story as a whole? So, like, if you, for example, were to sort of use the magic wand tool in Photoshop and click the romance in your plot and take it out, would your entire story fall apart, or would it kind of just have some holes, but it would be fine for the most part?
It would fall apart.
Okay, so talk
They
about that.
they're integral to each other's elevation. So the way I structured my series is I started books 1 and 2. They're parallel. It's his story and her story. They tell the same timeline, but it ends with them together. So they kind of meet at the same point where the third book picks up. And I purposely crafted that so it's like you get time to get to know each other independently. Like, you get to the whole picture of who these people are, what are their life experiences, what is the main driver. My female character, she's like a faith, like, basically not like a nun, but she's a healer and like a very faithful woman, and has a very set belief system around, like, this coming prophet. He happens to be what the prophet is, like, what would be her prophet, but he doesn't see that. He's not religious. He wasn't steeped in that. Like, he doesn't believe in himself. He's happy to go hide in the woods and just be by himself. So their relationship is the thing that essentially shows him that he can be that kind of leader, and between the two of them, it's it's a push and pull to like help him move towards being the hero that the story needs in the end. She ultimately pushes him all the way to accepting the leadership responsibility. So without her, he doesn't be the hero. He's not a hero.
Okay. So have you read Dune by chance?
I have not. No,
Have you seen the movies?
I have not.
Okay, fair enough. Well, for audience members will understand this then, but it sounds almost like she plays a sort of a Chani role, where she comes from a religious culture. Maybe Chani's wrong because Chani herself is kind of iffy on the whole religion business. But Paul Atreides in Dune doesn't want to be the religious figurehead, but then ends up kind of having to assume the role, and his relationship with Chani is part of what helps legitimize his situation as the uh, forthcoming prophet for the people of Arrakis. So that's cool. And again, it's helpful sometimes uh, to give examples to sort of relate this to other things. But even though I will relate these my guests books and stories to other media, I will highly recommend that you go and purchase their media. I actually have two of Jessica's books in the mail currently. I'm excited to read those when they get here. And down in the show notes you will find links to both Jessica and Secret's either Amazon page or personal websites, depending on which one I can find and which one is most convenient for you, the listener. You definitely go and purchase and support these authors, read their material, because then you, dear listener, will have more to reference in the future. And you can be that cool guy at the party who says, oh, that's kind of like this book that I just read, because people love listening to those people. So for you, Secret, kind of the same question. Like if you could magic tool the romance out of either of your books, or perhaps both, would they just kind of just fall apart, or could they stand on their own 2 feet?
So Bet Donovan would stand on its own. The romance in that is it's such a subplot and it's a lot of fun and it adds a nice layer of because it's a coming of age story, and so her falling in love finally or again is it's very much like a part of her showing that she has healed from her past, that she's capable of loving again and taking this relationship on. And so it would lose a nice little layer, but it's absolutely not necessary. The romance in that story is just like I said, just a small subplot. But Life in the Quiet is a romantic suspense, and so if you take the romance out, the story does fall apart on that one.
Yeah, fair enough. That would do it. Yeah, I, I mean, I think I kind of gave it away earlier. Like, there's some elements that I'd have to sort of reconfigure and sort of maybe gerrymander, but ultimately, I think the Swords of Arthur Shield could do without the romance if it needed to. I think it adds something to the story, but I don't think it necessarily is required by the story. And that's something, as a listener, if you're a young creative working on your project, I think that's something you should evaluate for each part of your story. What is integral to the heart of the story? If you're writing a fantasy novel about a fantasy adventure, some things might be you know imperative that you include, like a main character, someone for us to follow along. Some things may be imperative, like a quest to go on or a prophecy, and these sort of tropey things, but they're tropes for a reason. But some things might not be, and that's very different if you're writing in the romance genre, like the romance. I believe, did you say it was a thriller? Secret.
It's romantic suspense, and
Okay,
so
suspense.
it's kind of starts with these two. Like I said, they fall in love at first sight. It's early and it's quick, and then the main plot of the story would be the suspense, but the it falls apart if you don't have them working together. Sort of a lot of how they solve this mystery and how it also goes somewhat unsolved is because of the situation with both of the main characters. And so
Right, and that's, yeah. So romantic suspense, being kind of the genre there, it seems like romance is one of the two legs it stands on. So as she said, it would kind of be hard to write it without it. And so I think you should be doing that as a young creative, as a writer, figuring out what details are most important, what parts of your work are most important and most valuable, and focusing on those and making those as sharp as possible. Because if you're writing an adventure story and the adventure is boring, but the romance is, palpable off the page, maybe you should consider changing genres, or maybe you should just work and read more adventure stories to better your adventure writing skills, because maybe you just have a natural sort of gift for writing a romance, but you really want to write an adventure story, and there's nothing wrong with that. If that's the case, however, work at improving what you want to do and let everything else sort of help that thing you want to have happen flourish. So from this, I want to know, kind of going back, sort of the heart of the show, being sometimes in life we aren't as upbeat and gung ho about writing. Sometimes life just gets in the way. But I want to know, and we'll start with Secret this time. When you are in a darker place yourself, sort of like trying to, like, going through a rough patch, so to speak, how do you continue working with these romantic plots or subplots? Like, is your fire at that point kind of just a candle? Do the darker, harder parts of the romance take hold of the story, or do you think it's more so when life is dark, that the light of love shines the brightest? Like, what do you think? Like, how do you think about that idea?
I think that when life is dark, I probably tend to write darker things.
That's nice.
Um, I, but I concerning just love, I guess in general, that I think it's a choice, and so I think a lot of times if you you know tell yourself that you're in love and you act like you're in love, then these things will eventually follow and happen, and you'll get back to the right place. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and sure, a lot of the characters. I think it was. I think Diana Gabaldon. She wrote Outlander. I think she said somebody asked her who she based Jamie off of, and she said something like, "Well, all the men in my books are based off my husband. Like he's the only man I know." And so that's kind of like I mean, all the books, all the men in my books are based off my husband and my relationship with him, because that's the or my relationship with my kids, or because you write what inevitably part of you is going to end up seeping into your story, whether you want it to or not. But yeah, I think that definitely when I am in a darker place mentally, then that shows in my writing. It can be really therapeutic though too. Life in the Quiet actually started the whole project started because I was going through a really hard time with something in my personal life, and I wrote a couple of chapters just for like therapy, and then the whole thing ended up becoming a 4-book romance series.
Yeah. Okay. That's good to know that, or not. Well, not good to know, but it's interesting that you point out that kind of one of your series began in a darker place and you've built something out of it. That's really cool. I think that's what everybody should aspire to, is when you're in a darker place. I think that is one of the pieces of advice that I've heard from like psychologists and stuff, is when you're feeling depressed or feeling down on yourself, stop focusing on yourself and focus on others. And even if you weren't doing it necessarily explicitly as a writer, kind of writing as a sort of a self, I shouldn't say it's selfish, but it's sort of self-centered, not in a bad way, but it's sort of a solo hobby. But ultimately, the stories that you're writing are for other people. And so this is a selfless sort of endeavor that you've embarked on, even in that darker place, which is really cool. I think that's kind of awesome of you, actually. So thanks for sharing. And
Yeah.
Jessica, same question to you. When you're in those darker places, like mentally, does the romance in your work suffer, or is it more sort of like a beacon of light that you can kind of follow out of the darkness?
So I'll bring something personal to this
Mm-hmm.
as an anecdote or an example. When I was writing the fourth book in my series, I had gone through a miscarriage, and I put my character through that myself. And in a way, it was like the therapy session. Like, to write that chapter was to write out my pain and to like what the experience was like for me, to help me work through that. And, you know, there was her experience, but also, the flip side for his experience and how he was able to be there for her. And, obviously it's, but to Stacy's point, it's like in a way it's reflective of how your own relationship is. And since I would say that I'm in a happy, healthy marriage, we're going through this hard thing together. And, it was interesting to not only explore her perspective for what she felt like, the doubts, the things, the dark thoughts that go through your head about what that is for you, but then to come back and show the support side of, like, I will be here for you. I'm not leaving you. This, you're not broken, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But then also to explore that piece of his experience where he had to be strong for her, but where does he go when he needs to break down himself? Get emotional.
Yeah.
So, like, I gave him that moment where it's like you see the couple where he knew what she needed and she could not provide that same, like, there just wasn't the same thing for him, so he had to go somewhere else to, like, have his own, like, processing. But I think that it was a real it's real, like, I think that's kind of what we've experienced. But yeah, like, when you have these, like, a death or something or a struggle or pain, like, that always ends up somehow in my stories. In a way, like, just as a way of, like, exploring the ideas or working through them or bringing realism into the life of these people that you're creating.
Yeah. I think sometimes when we're in a dark place, exploring that darkness and sort of feeling our way through the darkness is done through the writing in a big way. I
Yeah, I want to add one
Yeah,
last thing thought
absolutely.
to that, because what this goes back to my whole idea of what enduring love is. Like, we have, like, so many stories that are being put out that are about the chase or the lust or the passion.
Hmm.
But to me, if you think of what love really is, it's in those moments. It's when you're together through something hard and you support each other, and that's why I think that kind of thing is important and shows that enduring love. It helps people understand what that looks like, or when it's right.
Right. And I think Secret mentioned earlier that, and I agree with what Secret said, and I also resonate with what you're saying. But ultimately, love is a choice. It's there are feelings and there are sort of vibes, as the kids would say, related with and surrounding love. But love is something you choose to do. And I I actually wrote my first I began writing my first book, which I didn't actually finish, and I don't even know if it exists. It might exist on some old hardware somewhere, but I couldn't find it. I actually started writing my first chapter book when I was around the age of uh, probably 14, 15. And what I was writing based on is I was writing a fantasy, because all of my first works were self inserts. It's not even close. It's just kind of obvious when I go back and reread them that I wanted this to be real for me, so I wrote it for these characters. And what it was I had the fantasy, the very Disney sort of cartoonish fantasy of saving someone that I loved or that I wanted to be with, and that being the sort of the catalyst for the relationship. Which, granted, is probably not the best basis for a relationship, but it was what I knew, because I grew up on those old Disney movies of Cinderella and specifically like Snow White and Prince Charming and all these sort of stories, and so I wrote after the woman, or no, she's a woman now, obviously, because she's my age, but she was a girl then because I was a boy. And the girl that I first felt feelings for, the first crush that I had, so to speak, I uh, never got to build a relationship with her because of my behavioral issues due to my autism, and also just being a punk kid. I ended up getting kicked out of that school, and so I never got to build the relationship with her that I desired, and so it became a fantasy in my mind. And so back to what I was talking about, the first chapter book that I started writing, the opening chapters to the adventure were the main character rescuing the girl that he had a crush on from a danger in their middle school, playground or play yard. And those stories have since pretty much been abolished, except for the sort of the spirit of one of the characters kind of subsists today in my sci-fi setting. But um it's hard to write romance, and this kind of, I think, was my point all along, on this tangent. It's hard to write romance well and compelling when you're a single bachelor who's never experienced like the deep emotions of love. I'm not like, I haven't divorced anybody, I've never been married, I've never really gone through those motions before. And so part part of this episode, actually, and if you're listening to this you might relate, part of this episode is selfish for me because I want to know how you as people, and this is, you're both married women, so you have a lot of experience in this, and I was kind of hoping to get some guys on too, because I have a lot of mutuals who are married men as well, and I would love to have their perspective on this too. But it's sort of fun for me to get to pick your guys' brain about the romance in your stories and how you write it and how you endeavor to go through it, because I'm looking to, in my next book, write a very important romantic plot. Like the plot of the story wouldn't happen without the romance, and so it's important to me that I have this sort of research in my belt when I go into that next story. And so, to answer this question for me, it is that sort of that exploring the darkness of life through my story, through my characters, and through my stories is very much how I've operated as an author, basically from the beginning. Because the heartbreak I felt, having to this day still never been in the same room as that girl again since I left that middle school, and having lost her, the one that got away sort of mythos, and how that uh, sparked in me a passion for writing, because I wanted a fantasy that was in my head, this fantasy of this girl that I liked. I wanted it so bad that I sort of like Dr. Frankenstein, my first story. I was like, I'm going to make this real, even though I know it's not, and it never will be. And thankfully, that's why I said I'm glad I probably will never be able to find those drafts and those prose again, because they were probably horrendous, probably creepy too, to be honest. To go back and read it, I wouldn't be surprised if they were creepy. But that's in the past now, and I'm writing better stories today because of where I came from. And so, the romance in Shards of Arthur's Shield is very much a beacon on a hill in my distance, and I'm hoping that when I find a woman, that I will have a similar relationship that my character has with his woman, and it's sort of a relationship that is strong and founded in God and all these ideals that I hope to have one day. I'm writing into the story because those are the good morals and the good um ideals that I want to see persist in society. So that's what I'm writing. Yeah, and so that's that, and I'm very excited to see, or to how other people experience that, those ideals as they read my book. So, oh boy, that was a lot. It was a long tangent from me, and it was a lot of helpful information from you guys. So thank you. I actually didn't have much more to go on. I do want to ask, kind of, you guys, and we'll start with Jessica this time. When it comes to the mythos of the Cupid's arrow, uh, how has that ideal of, I guess the Cupid's arrow ideal is love at first sight, right? So how has that affected your stories, if at all? And if it hasn't, have you chosen actively to not write a love at first sight story, or have you chosen to just kind of write a story and see where it goes?
Yeah, so for my romance, when the characters meet, my hero is on the verge of death. So
Hmm.
he's described as being like very pale and he's gaunt and he's like his hair is like brittle and so he's not like a beacon of sunshine. But he's intriguing still to her in a way because he expresses interest in her faith.
Hmm.
So like just by being slightly like she's been trying to convert people and like be an evangel trying to spread the word and and she gets shot down all the time. Like all the men make fun of her. Like there's a joke going around, but he's interested in hearing more. And so she's like, "Oh, well, good. Somebody I can tell this stuff to that will actually listen to me."
Hmm.
So he has an appeal, but I intentionally, he's described as being a handsome man, but like I wanted to take that out. Like the relationship here forms mostly from this their interaction together. She does save him. Like that's yeah, reverse, I guess, but
Yeah.
because she's a healer. So she ends up saving him and they get to know each other through treating him and you know, time before she has any idea that he's a prophet or that he's, whatever. So you can see their relationship kind of developing, they're getting more open and so it definitely wasn't like a shot, but once he figures out what he wants, he's very much like he's all in. He's gonna figure this out. She's a little more wishy-washy as far as like, can this work? Like, is this okay? Like, this is sacrilegious? I don't know. And he's like, I'm just gonna keep being here and showing my love through my actions. I'm just gonna, whatever you need to do, I'm just gonna keep just being here. So it's fun to play their dynamic, but it's definitely not like a love at first sight kind of thing.
For sure. Cool. I mean that's probably a more realistic situation, and it is. It almost has the tinge of the man falling in love with the nurse who nursed him back to health in war, and that's kind of cool. I like those stories. That's that's fun. So yeah, secrets. Kind of similar question to you. You mentioned that in one of your books, it is very much a love at first sight. Cupid sort of got a collateral hit with that arrow, but in
Yes.
Bet Donovan, it perhaps maybe isn't. There's more to it.
Yeah, in Bet Donovan, like I said earlier, if you had to classify it, as a trope, it would be more enemies to lovers because they're on opposite sides, sort of this war. He
Mm-hmm.
ends up, without giving too much away, because it's kind of towards the middle of the book where they actually meet even for the first time, because it's not integral really to the plot.
Mm-hmm.
So, without giving too much away, they just were at one point on opposite sides. And then at some point, he realizes sort of what's really going on. And that allows them to be allied. And yeah, they have a very sweet. They have a very sweet love story, and I love it. Their story, because he's very supportive of her, and he's very understanding of her like calling to protect this town and of the abilities that she has and the good that she's doing. And so he's very what she's doing is very dangerous, and he's not trying to hold her back from it. He's just trying to support her and help her however he can. And so I think that's kind of a neat and fun story. The In Life in the Quiet, where they fall in love at first sight, um, that one is it's really a precious story, I think, too. I was really wanting to sort of explore a lot of, I think, themes that are a little bit taboo in Christian romance, some real world things. I think that people don't like for their Christian characters in literature to be sinners. And I think that's not realistic. And so, these two characters are a little bit later in life. She's been married before, she's a widow. And so they are sort of navigating this thing where they both very much want to have a sexual relationship, but they don't. She very much doesn't think that it's right and should not be doing that before marriage. She's trying to sort of navigate this thing that hasn't she never thought was going to happen to her, which is being dating again, and sort of being hit with all of these romantic feelings while she's technically single. She's got her kids watching her. She really wants to do this the right way, but at the same time, real life says that a lot of times you put yourself in a vulnerable situation and all of a sudden, you've lost your mind a little bit, right? And what does that look like and as a Christian, what do you do, and how do you navigate kind of that messy world of dating, especially when you haven't done it in so long, when you're doing it with your, like, under the microscope, your children, and trying to honor God at the same time. And so that's what kind of what that one is about. Both very different stories, but lots of fun.
Yeah, I think that's something that I think all three of us here would call ourselves Christian writers. It's something tough to tackle in storytelling because the world is so already just so full of. And I'm not saying your plot there is debauched. Don't hear what I'm not saying. But like, it's so.
Now, and let me just
Okay, yeah,
preface real
go for it.
fast, if I may. Sort of, to me, the game at that point becomes: can you make people feel things without the cheap tricks? Can you elicit emotion and make people feel this passion and this love without, because I don't want to, I'm not going to write, like an explicit romance.
Right,
But
right.
and so I think I was telling somebody this the other day, but I think, Stephanie Meyer kind of, I feel like, wrote like the master class on that, where in Twilight there's really not, they do not have sex until they get married in that series, and then before then they just kiss a couple of times. It's not like a lot of, there's just not any sexual content, but golly, did she make us feel that love so hard. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
it was so passionate. And so I think that is a really, just a test for me, as a writer. Can I make this love story, you know, passionate and epic without it, crossing any lines, and while it's still, not sexually explicit, very closed door.
Right. And I wasn't trying to imply that any of that happened. Don't worry. I hear you. But what I'm getting at is, as a Christian writer, writing characters who struggle with temptation and even fall into sin, but then need redemption, is something that we should be tackling in our stories. I don't think we should be ignoring that or being afraid of it. I can think of the example in the Shards of Arthur's Shield where um, the hero himself does um, he has to kill, but he knows that killing is wrong. He knows that killing is a sin, so he has to struggle with that classic sort of ideal of killing for the defense of oneself and the people that one loves is not the same thing as killing for vengeance or for vindictiveness or what have you. But there's another scene where his friend does fall into sin, and he does fall into greed because he wants the gold that the dragon is hoarding, and that sort of jealousy and desire for what someone else has, so I guess envy, is something he has to deal with, and that causes him to go down a road that eventually leads to his death. And so it's important that we show sin as real and something that happens and something that can have very tragic results. But I think it's also important that we show redemption and forgiveness and as I said earlier, amore über alles. So that's sort of my version of love overall, and that would also include God's love. I think God's love is the pattern by which we are supposed to, as Christians, pattern our loves, and that means the love of our friends, the love of our spouses, and what have you. So, um, don't just let sin be something that is totally taboo and off the page, but also let people who fall into sin not have to die for it, because there's a lot of Christian media, oh, that character sinned, he's the next one to die now. I think that's not necessarily the best way to go about it. I think, oh, they sinned, great, let's redeem them like Thomas, or let's redeem them like Paul and make them someone better than their sin. uh, yeah, so that's something actually that I'm going to be exploring a lot in this trilogy that I'm planning, because the main character is a straight up a pagan wizard who eventually gets he eventually finds Christ and is redeemed out of pagan witchcraft, essentially. And that's gonna be tough to try to sell to my Christian friends because of what the first two books entail. But I think it'll be a really powerful story towards the end of the third book when this character who's gone his whole life knowing all of this power and just gives it all up to embrace the love of God and that kind of thing. So that's
And hey, your audience might not be Christians. Your audience might be people that would have otherwise not listened to the word, if you didn't write something that started out that way.
right, exactly.
Be witnessing to a whole group of people.
Mm-hmm. And I also Christianity is never mentioned directly by name in that series. It's called the Way, and the followers are called Waymen because Christ called himself the Way, and the only reason that followers of Christ are called Christians is because at Antioch they were first insulted and called little Christs, and so there's I'm kind of playing with a alternate universe, kind of like how else could this religion sort of develop. So that's a tangent. That's not the first book in that series. That doesn't even come out until December, so we got a ways for that still. Um, yeah, so that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. These ideas of romance and love and how we affect them in our stories and how they affect us as writers. So that's awesome. Thank you guys for being here. I do want to ask though, as sort of is tradition on this show, and we'll start with Secret on this one. If you could give one piece of advice to yourself as a brand new writer, back when you first started writing, what would that advice be? And maybe if you think of a way, you could sort of involve how you write romance and like how you might advise your younger self as to how to write better romance.
Hey, golly, feel like you asked me this very controversial question right at the end. I think you have to read more romance.
Oh no. Oh no.
Isn't that the discourse on Twitter right
It
now?
is. It is, unfortunately.
I I recommend if you have not experienced love firsthand romantically that you're gonna have to consume it in the media somehow via
Mm-hmm.
movies or books. There are just some great writers that can really sort of elicit those same sort of emotions from you if you are trying to write something like that, but you don't have personal experience. So I would recommend reading more romance and watching more romances.
Very cool. That's very solid advice. And as I mentioned on X earlier, some of us are just plagued by visions and we have to get stories out. And so while you should read, being literate is good. I think as Noah Ray on X might attest, being literate is optional. Of course, that's a joke, but definitely if you aren't literate, work on that, please. Because if nothing else, I want to sell you my book so you can read it. It's kind of hard to do that if you're not literate. So yeah. So all right, and Jessica, kind of same question to you. If you were to advise yourself when you were younger, first starting to write, how would you advise them to write better stories and better romances, particularly?
Yeah, so obviously, reading them is great, but I also think it's good to remember that some of the media might be, again, limited to things that aren't always healthy or depictions. You got to be
Mm-hmm.
mindful of that. I got a lot of inspiration from just my own marriage, but also couples that I knew that were like the long lasting people. Like I've been fortunate that my parents are still married, that my grandparents were all married. So you can use models from other people in your life that have the types of relationships that you want, and don't be afraid to ask them questions. Most people like to talk about themselves. They
Mm-hmm.
like to talk about the things that make them happy or bring them joy. So if you're trying to find like what tell me about your marriage, tell me about your relationship, like how do you go on date? Like you can interview people, don't be afraid to do that to try and fill in the holes and try and understand like what makes them tick or how do they work. Um, the world is around you and there's lots of resources.
I would agree. I would have to agree. I think using resources that you have at your disposal is very important. I'm basing a lot of my knowledge of things yet to come in my life based on conversations I've had with my mentors, that being like my youth pastor, my pastor, my mom. some conversations I had with my stepdad years ago. So I'm basing a lot of my like working knowledge on things that I don't have actual firsthand experience in, on people who do have firsthand experiences in them. Cool. So
I have to write from the male. So most of my story I took the female perspective with the romantic parts. This next one I'm working on, I have to flip that and I have to do more of his perspective. So I already told my husband that I am going to be asking him lots of questions. Like how a man would react to certain things, because I'm like, I don't necessarily know, like, what if a man was in this position, like what would it be like? So
right.
I'm definitely going to be drawing on the external knowledge that I don't have and cannot possibly possess. So
Yeah. On the point of inspiring our future fellow creatives, ask people. Don't be afraid to ask awkward questions, especially to your confidants and mentors and parents and things. It's worth your time, and you'll learn a lot. And I think that's my advice too. Is today is just, if you're unsure about something, ask a person. Don't ask Gemini. Don't ask Grok. Don't ask GPT or any of these nonsense platforms. Ask a real life person and you'll get a better response. I can almost guarantee it. So, yeah, I'm going to now give my friends here a chance to plug themselves a little bit. And Jessica, we'll start with you. Where can people find your material, and where can they support you and buy your books?
absolutely. So you can find me most active as far as social media on X, but I have a presence on Instagram, Facebook, etc. Jessica, I think _Barbary is my name for most things. I have a website, jessicabarbary.com, that has all the links to my books. If you're interested in exploring that concept of sin and redemption in heroes, then I would recommend, I have a standalone called Dragon Riders of Old. That's a good jumping off point into my world if you don't want to commit to a 4-part series or a 3-part series.
Hmm.
So that's a good one. And otherwise, I also run a YouTube channel and do live streams with books. Yeah, it's called Indie Book Release, and it is fun where I get to sit with authors on the day that their books release and do a little interview and we talk, and it's fun.
Yep. And I can attest. I've seen a lot of those, and I've even been in the live of some of them, and I've been able to josh some of the authors for their funny costumes that they wear. And I'll have that linked below, her X account as well as her YouTube, and the a link to probably her Amazon author page. Go follow and support these creatives. Thank you. And Secret, kind of the same thing to you. Go ahead and plug yourself. Where can people find you? Where can they support you and hear more from you?
Yeah, so I'm Secret Stacy. I write under the pen name SR Stacy. I am active on Twitter at Secret Koran. I'm active on Facebook at Secret Stacy, and I'm on Instagram at Secret Koran Stacy. Because Secret Stacy was already taken.
Fair.
My website is www.srstacy.com. Bet Donovan and the Battle for Wyoming is available on Amazon, and Laugh in the Quiet will be available on May 22nd. So watch out for that if romantic suspense is your jam.
Very cool. You and I might have to do an honor duel to see which one of us gets to be on Jessica's show that day, because I'm also releasing on May 22nd. So
Oh
It's the
man.
22nd.
yeah.
What?
Or who knows? She
I'll
might
do
have
a
time for
back to
2 shows.
back.
I don't know. Yeah. Cool.
I'll do a back to back release.
Perfect.
I'm
So
game.
awesome. My name is AB Timothy. You can find me right here on X at x.com/AB Timothy author. You can read some of my material on my website, which is abtimothy.com. There I have the first chapter from my next 2 novels. One novel which I haven't actually officially like announced the title of yet, so I'll keep that sort of in my back pocket. But the title's there on my website. If you want to go read, you can read the first chapter of that one, or you can read the first chapter of my debut novel coming in May, that being the Shards of Arthur's Shield, which has been the baseline for most of my conversation this episode so far. Both of those first episodes are available on my website. I'd highly encourage you to go enjoy those. Get excited for the upcoming release. Also, if you're watching this after the fact on YouTube, today being Sunday, March 1st, 2026, the Kickstarter for the Shards of Arthur Shield has just gone live over on Kickstarter.com. You'll find a link for that actually at the top of the description, because that's kind of important. And you'll be able to go there and support the release of my indie book, and you'll have access to a whole bunch of different little perks and tiers and all those things, which I'll let you explore on your own and get excited about, because there's some really cool stuff. Nothing on there is going to cost more than a modern AAA game. So, that's not saying much, but also it's saying a lot. So definitely go support if you're into the idea of supporting an indie release. And yeah, that's all I had. Like, subscribe, comment, share the show with your friends, and I hope you all have a wonderful week. And remember, as you go about your week, keep the beacon lit.